we have received investment pledges from a number of other countries that our envoys, as well as myself and ministers, have had occasion to visit. And we have been truly, truly humbled by the interest of our own investors in South Africa, as well as investors from offshore in the South African investment story. We have appointed task teams to work with those countries that have made pledges to convert those pledges into investments.
Well, on the fix, we like to get to the heart of things and dive straight in. So welcome to Economic Development Minister Ebrahim Patel. Minister, welcome to the fix.
Good evening, Karima, to you and to Peter and to all the viewers.
Well, to get straight to the heart of the matter, the President said he was humbled by the pledges. I was particularly interested in him talking about local investments because for a long time there was talk that local investors were sitting it out. Break down for us who the big local guns were that put their money where their mouths are.
So let me start, Karima, by saying what the investment conference was, is if SONA was government reconnecting with the nation, the investment conference was us reconnecting with the investment community. And we recognize that we've got to get domestic investment going. It's a signal to foreign investors, but also there's a significant expertise, knowledge, and insight that local investors get. And here's the important issue. When local people invest, the dividend flow goes into our savings base. That's critical. So we need foreign investment, but we must reactivate the confidence of domestic investors in this economy. So out of the 290 billion that the President spoke of, about two-thirds, let's call it 70%, ballpark, was made up of companies that we can broadly describe as domestic investors, and about 30% were foreign investors. A big part of the domestic investment was expanding plant and equipment. We're not counting mainly just mergers and acquisitions, with one little exception of a foreign investment, a small sum. This is principally expanding the stock of fixed investment, because that's where jobs are created, and that's how you expand output, which of course then translates into better GDP figures. And crucially, it gives you the opportunity to bring new entrepreneurs, young people, women and others into the economy. That
inclusivity that you're seeking.
The inclusivity. But let me perhaps just turn to a few examples of the kind of things. Let me, for a moment, just talk about foreign, because there is a bit of a focus on it. We landed a commitment by a Rwandan investor, so from elsewhere on the African continent, who's going to set up a plant to build, to manufacture cell phones in South Africa. We got Amazon to say that they're going to build a number of data centers. They're going to have quite a significant data center commitment in South Africa that's used for cloud computing. But one other really nice investment is in a food processing facility that is connected to OR Tambo, so that we can produce quickly and move it onto South Africa's logistics system and move it abroad, so that we expand exports. So there are tons of these kind of examples. Local investors, principally and very importantly, expanding commitment, where people were on the pause button, they're taking their hands off the pause button and pressing the start button. I want to say, though, the investment conference is the start. From here, there's still an enormous amount of hard work. So while we're clearly happy with the outcome, that doesn't replace rolling up the sleeves and getting things going, building long-term, durable relationships with investors. It's a trust issue. It's a confidence issue. It's people knowing that in the long run, we're going to be pursuing policies that they can understand, that they can predict, that make sense to them, and that they can see there's a return to them, and we can see jobs, investment, and growth.
Peter?
So, Minister, hi. So, I just wanted to, all of which is fantastic, and it makes sense for our investment ambassadors to go out and speak to local people first, because they know them. I mean, they're known entities, and you can have lunch with somebody almost immediately in Johannesburg. What worries me about the way the investment conference played out, it was like kind of watching an auction where people put up their hand and say, I bid 2 billion, and I'll do this and I'll do that. And what we didn't hear being made was the case for investment in South Africa so much. I mean, it's not in the papers anyway. It's not being reported as that. Why invest here and not, let's say, in Vietnam or Hungary or Chile, for instance? It'd be interesting to hear people learn to make the case for South Africa rather than somewhere else. And I think even in government it would be interesting for people in government to learn to make that case. The other thing that occurred to me is that we get mixed up and it'll damage the process if we don't get it right from the start, which is that we talk about investments as if they're new when they're not new. So some of the investments, Daimler-Benz, let's say, in East London, we know about the 10 billion rand. That was already in June, but it sort of came into the numbers this time. And isn't it possible to build just a publicly thing, run by somebody whose job it is in the government, to update where we know what's been promised, by who, by when, how, what the status is of it at the moment, so that we don't keep repeating the Daimler-Benz is spending 10 billion, because it's the third time I've heard it, and people look around and say, well, is that new? And you say, no, it can't possibly be. That was in June already, and the decision must have been made last year probably in Germany. So just, let's make a game of it. Let's say, come on, we've got this target, and it's a brilliant target. Let's see how we're doing. You know how charities used to have that thermometer going up? So as you got your donations, whatever it is, you paint it until the whole thing was red. Can't the state do something like that to pull people into this project, to see how it is going to get enthusiastic? Because what happened over this investment conference, that everybody on my Twitter line was saying, is that new or is that not new? And so there was a lot of doubt about it, and it spoiled it a little bit.
So let me start with your second point, Peter. I think what we want to do is to build let's call it a barometer, something that measures the commitments that are made and tracks it. And in fact, the President now is keen to get corporate South Africa to put on the table their investment plans as a whole, not just the ones that were announced, because these were really just a part of a much bigger investment story. Why did we use, for example, Daimler-Benz again? And I think there was a very simple reason. We made the announcements of those investments that were made or committed to after the President announced the initial $100 billion US dollar target. Now, at the next occasion when we begin to renew the commitments, we would have, as it were, banked these. But of course, some of these still need to be, we must make sure we implement. That's very important. But I think it's a sensible idea. We want to build an investment observatory where people can plug in and say, look, these are the commitments we make and these are the time frames we make it within. But I want to go back to the earlier point, because it's a fair point you make, that we need to make the South African investment case strongly but crisply. And we've done quite a bit of that at the investment conference. We had 9, really, if you ask me what was the key part of the investment conference, it was not the announcements. It was the working sessions where we rolled up sleeves, and in 9 sectors, we had probably about 35 or so private sector players, many South African business people, young entrepreneurs, established businesses, cabinet members, making the case for investment in South Africa in that sector, whether it's mining or ICT or venture capital initiatives, or I was in the manufacturing sector. In that sector, it was fantastic. What people were doing is not just making the 10 points why you should invest in South Africa in a broad, generic sense. That was there. But they also said, I am investing in this part of manufacturing, I'm making money, and this is how I'm managing to get the regulatory arrangements resolved. Yes, there are some challenges. This is how I'm going about solving them. And we left at the end of that discussion with foreign investors, I think, pretty optimistic that they've heard not a set of textbook issues, our population size, market, not just that, but direct experiences from people who are actually committed money in the South African economy, who are employing people, but importantly, who are making money in the process. So I do take your point, and we've produced in the conference handouts a useful set of books. I'm going to pass it through to many more investors. You'd also be very welcome to have a look at it. Let's share it with South Africans, because there is actually quite a compelling story why people should invest in South Africa, the gateway to the African continent.
Talking about the African continent, what component of the delegates, because I saw that you were oversubscribed, you actually had more delegates because people were really interested. What proportion of the delegates came from Africa? It's always been your aim, the Minister of Trade and Industry's aim, to increase intra-Africa trade. It makes sense for us to do that, given what Europe is going through, given the turmoil in BRICS, for example, with the election of a possible far-right candidate in Brazil. How big is the African appetite, the rest of the continent, for us?
I'd say of the delegates that we had there, about 30% were foreign delegates, and we count within that delegates from the rest of the continent. And I'd say it was a fairly sizable number who came from elsewhere, not just as delegates, but as also as participants. We had one of the big players, Econet, Strive, coming to South Africa. He's from Zimbabwe. He runs quite an interesting operation elsewhere in the continent in telecoms.
Yes.
And he came to tell his story here. We had, as I indicated, Mara Telecoms, which made an announcement that they want to build, they want to manufacture a African cell phone. And they looked around, 54 countries. The one they felt were best placed, the right mix of skills and infrastructure and connection with the rest of the continent, was South Africa. So we had those kind of stories. And there's more we can do. We think at the next conference, we want to have a much stronger focus on the opportunities in the continent. And I should just say, in about a week or so, we will be co-hosting an African Development Bank conference, specifically for investors from the continent, looking at what we can do to boost infrastructure spending so that we have the roads, the rail, the water, the electricity to trade more with each other. One of the factoids I put out at the one session that I attended was to say, when I started in this job, Peter, some 9 years ago, intra-African trade was about 12% of total trade by the continent, the lowest by far of any region in the world. Today it's about 17.5%. It's going in the right direction. And Africa is the big storyline for us. Where are we growing our exports of manufactured goods? It's to the rest of the continent. It now accounts for some 40% of all our manufactured exports. That's an extraordinary number. And there's more appetite, more traction, more opportunity. But we've got to get the infrastructure story right. And that's what the African Development Conference will be about.
And of course, that is also the big challenge, because it's in infrastructure that you have a lot of corruption, because you have state players. And of course, there's a contestation, there has been for the last 10 years or so, on what exactly the way in which that project must be rolled out. What are the kinds of sureties that you gave investors that these big rollouts by government will come in on time, on budget, that there will be progress reports, and that the red flags will go up if they need to, so that we don't sit with half-built dams, half-built bridges, and things that, you know, eventually end up just going into a big black hole again?
I think investors were generally, in my discussion with them, foreign investors, they were impressed with the storyline of a young democracy actually taking the kind of action we did. The cleaning up of state-owned companies led by Praveen Gordhan in Transnet, in Eskom, the work of the Commission of Inquiry, the removal of the head of SARS and others. They saw these as concrete commitments and steps.
They actually spoke about them.
They spoke about them, and they raised these issues with us in a very positive, that for them this was one of the attractions of operating here. They can see our democracy is resilient. Yes, it was under pressure.
People are obviously attracted to well-behaved governments. I mean, that's as simple as that. And I have to ask you, and I don't want to put you in the spot, but it probably will, about foreign investment. One of the potential foreign investments we have here is the sale of Denel to the Saudi Arabian government. Surely that can no longer be on the table.
That's outside of my remit. It was not an area that we brought into the investment conference, and I'm sure the colleagues on that committee are the best people to talk through this. Peter, you'll know it's the Arms Committee, and there's a number of cabinet members. I'm not on that committee.
Well,
but I make this point, and I make this point because it's an important point. What the investment conference also did it brought together work across government. So the work of Rob Davies in the DTI, the work of Pravin Gordhan with state-owned companies, the work that Tito Mboweni is leading now, announced in the medium-term budget policy statement, Jeff Khadebe on energy, and Quinty on water. It was really interesting to see 20 cabinet members go to these working sessions on sectors of the South African economy, engage with investors, hear them out, and give the government perspective on this, as well as the new direction we're going. And coming to Karima, to your point, the price of freedom, as they say, is eternal vigilance.
Yes.
And the fight against corruption means that we've got to constantly work on this. We've got to clean up our act on the auditors' firms, because ultimately you don't have cabinets pouring through these kind of details. Auditors are our assurance. We've got to have boards of state-owned companies that do their job, that keeps the management accountable, and we have to have CEOs with integrity and the requisite skill to run these large operations. But this is what we're going to have to do to rebuild this economy and produce to the needs of our people.
A huge job.
Minister, a final question from me. The state of municipalities impact hugely on the experiences that businesses have in countries, because they have to deal with them on a range of issues, both domestic and foreign. Our municipalities are in a terrible state. Tito Mboweni spoke about over 100 of them operating on unfunded budget. That is technically an illegal thing to do. How crucial is the capacitating of these institutions to the investment success story of South Africa?
Surely it's got to be one of our top priorities. A foreign investor, but also a domestic investor, wants to set up a factory, talks to us nationally, but ultimately security of supply of electricity, getting access to water, working with the local municipality on land zoning issues, that's dealt with at local level. And if we don't resolve that with speed, it will retard, it will put a brake on implementing many of the commitments that investors are making. So I can't underline more how important that is. And it really does mean that we've got to all work beyond just simply asserting constitutional powers. Yes, that is always there. But there's got to be a much more collaborative model, and there has to be an infusion of skills in municipalities. Even when you get your governance right, you need engineers, you need technical people, you need people with financial skills who are professionals, who hold the line when it comes to improper decision making. It's those South Africans that we're calling on, come into the municipalities, help us make the country work.
All right. Peter, you want to put your last question?
No, I really, just to say, because I know the Minister's interested in industrialization, and so am I, is that the point of Denel comes up, and it just occurs to me, that Denel is it's a really good company that makes really good weapons, and the result, the industrial sort of benefits of that capability are incalculable in a way in terms of the engineering and the kind of skills that are required. We see it now in the square kilometre array that's been run by Denel people. We see it in little parts that we make for Airbus aircraft, ex-Denel people. And it just, there's a real problem. We have to save this company somehow. It's been run into the ground. State capture, part of the problem. And obviously there's a Saudi buy, and it's a difficult question because the Saudis have gone and done an unspeakable thing to this journalist in Turkey. But we somehow, I hope that you're able to at least speak to your colleagues in the right committee. And we figure out a way to save Denel, because it is the repository of so much engineering skill and experience. We can't afford to lose it.
It was also one of your successful state-owned companies before the Guptas got their hands on it, quite frankly.
That's true, and so was Transnet Rail Engineering. We've got Africa's largest rail engineering capability sitting in a state-owned company. And when I talk to Pravin Gordhan, it's we're talking about how we can unleash that and become Africa's rail manufacturer.
They've lost the contract in Botswana.
Yeah. But I think we're on the right track now. So all of these are the aftershocks of state capture. But when it settles, we are going to aggressively try to turn it around and ensure we become the manufacturers, not just of trains, but also railway lines. By the way, I should make the last little point, because Johan Berger of Highveld Steel was at the conference. We now have a company that went into business rescue a number of years ago.
Yes.
They've reopened in Mpumalanga. They employ more than 1,000 people in a diversity of activities, one of which is to be Africa's only rail line manufacturers. And you bring there your technical engineering and other skills. We can do so much to build and strengthen growth on the continent, our home, but also our market, and increasingly a source of investment for our economy and a source of innovation. When Africans come and live and work here, they bring enormous entrepreneurship and skills, and we can benefit, and we can give back in the sense of co-investing in neighboring countries. This continent is really the future of the South African economy.
Minister, on that, I won't disagree with you. We will, of course, keep a look at that barometer so that we can keep track of those investments. Thank you so very much for joining us here on The Fix.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, still ahead on The Fix, we speak to the Democratic Alliance spokesperson, Solly Malatsi, about the fallout between the party and the soon-to-be erstwhile mayor of Cape Town, Patricia de Lille. See you after the break.